what the hell is this? Malört made poets of regular people.
It's been described as tasting like a forest fire if the forest was made of earwax.
The audience is completely turned over, and it's 1,000 cases of discovery. Okay, cheers.
Welcome to The Takeaway. I'm Alex Maragos. In the short history of The Takeaway, we have tried to explain topics through approachable conversations. But never is that mission, and it is a mission here for us, more difficult than it is today. The topic often defies explanation. It's often incomprehensible. Words simply fail to describe the what, the how, and the why behind something that has only one word, it's 2 syllables, but it lingers longer than anybody really wants. That topic is Malört. And who better to attempt to explain this thing than the man who wrote a book about it? Josh Noel is the author of Malört, The Redemption of the Revered and Reviled Spirit. Josh, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks, Alex. That was pure poetry.
Oh, thank you. Well, I hope the poetry will last throughout our conversation because we're going to test it a little bit. With the product itself, I thought, how better to start our conversation than by really digging into the product?
Absolutely.
What do you think?
I'm all in. People usually save that shot for the end of the conversation, but I think this is the right way to do it.
Right. I think we're doing a much better order. And I just want to add, I've been having a really good day today. And
now it's about to get better.
Now it's about to get better. That is the pour for me and the pour for you. It's been a minute. I've had it before. But it's always nice to just be reminded of
Sure.
what this is.
And
so
how do you feel about it?
Ask me in 10 seconds.
Okay, cheers.
It's good.
So there's phase 1.
Just as I remember.
And then there's phase 2, which is going to start. Now phase 2 is kicking in
Yeah,
now.
I'm hitting phase
You get
2.
phase 2?
Yeah.
You got to be a real trooper for phase 2.
I'm tasting a combination of burn and bitterness that is unrivaled in the liquor world. And I really wish would go away.
Okay, fair enough.
What are you tasting?
Deliciousness.
Deliciousness.
I enjoy Malört. I do. So it's quite bitter, quite astringent, right? But I get 2 things principally. One is grapefruit, bitter grapefruit.
And I don't like grapefruit, so this is tracking just fine.
Right, so that's problem number 1 for you. But
Yes.
and I love grapefruit, so
Okay.
it's working for me. But it's that grapefruit where if you bit into the grapefruit
Correct.
with the pith and everything. And thing 2, rubber bands. Now I haven't actually chewed on a lot of rubber bands or any rubber bands, but I feel like this is what rubber bands would taste like if you were to chew on them.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's also, the rubber bands are now going a little lower than it was here. Now it's down, pushing down.
Yeah. So back in the day, there was a lot of variation between Malört batches, and now there's much less, but this is a particularly good batch, I'm going to say right here. It's a little less sweet up front.
Okay. The quality control very high on this one.
Yeah. No.
And a special thanks to James Naveau, one of my coworkers who provided this bottle, another aficionado and fan. I'm just going to read some of what other people have said about this. This is from your prologue, actually, in your book. Again, Malört, The Redemption of a Revered and Reviled Spirit. Prologue says, quote, "It's been described as tasting like a forest fire if the forest was made of earwax and burnt vinyl car seat condensation. It's been called hairspray and death, akin to swallowing a burnt condom full of gas." That's one of my favorites. The actor and writer John Hodgman previously said and famously said that Malört tastes like, quote, "pencil shavings and heartbreak as if flavored with darkness and pain." I think all of it is very apropos to what I'm feeling at the moment. And there's a wonderful way that people have responded to this drink. That is some of the most creative writing and creative sayings and marketing I've ever heard from people who are just saying what they feel about Malört.
To quote a line from the book, Malört made poets of regular people. We tend to think of products as things we like or don't like, right? And if we like them, we have them again. If we don't like them, we don't have them again. If we like them, we recommend them to our friends. If we don't like them, we don't recommend them to our friends. Malört has the unique power of being something that so many people don't like, yet they insist. They don't just recommend, they insist that their friends taste it. And in the I was going to say disgust, but that's a bit much because I don't want to scare people.
For some, it's disgust.
In the disgust, the distaste, the disdain
Sure.
is also love. It's just and fascination, and again, this desire to share it. And so, yeah, people will taste the stuff and they say things like that.
You wrote it so well in the prologue. I love this thing and I hate this thing, and I love to hate this thing, and I want you to try it so you can love to hate it with me, and maybe even love it. There's so much in that sentence, but it does perfectly encapsulate exactly how people feel about this drink.
And again, that's just there's so few products like that where it just sort of it completely flips our equation of value of good and bad.
Right.
It's something that we love to hate.
The first thing I want to ask you, which I'm sure you have gotten so many times in the course of chronicling this drink, is why? Why this drink, and why do you like Malört and thought it needed to be written about?
Well, so I was a reporter at the Chicago Tribune for a long time and covered the beer industry there and bars and cocktails and things like that. And I wrote a book in 2018 about the beer industry. It's called Barrel-Aged Stout and Selling Out, Goose Island, Anheuser-Busch, and How Craft Beer Became Big Business. That came out in 2018. It's sort of about the rise of craft beer.
We got to have you back for that episode.
I would love to. We could taste some beers and have a good time.
Yes.
So I wanted to write another book. So what I'm getting at here is I came in through the lens of not Malört appreciation, but journalism, and looking for another book. And from working at the Tribune, I'd written about Malört and knew that people were fascinated by Malört. Those stories were always read, they were shared, and it's sort of self-evident too, right? People are fascinated by Malört. So one night I get the kids in bed. Malört is great for settling the stomach. Its primary ingredient is wormwood, which is something that is used for like muscular cramp and
used,
for medicinal effects.
Been used in ancient times.
Yes, for generations and millennia.
Yeah.
And so I enjoy a shot of Malört after a big meal. So I had a big meal one night, got the kids in bed, went to the kitchen, just had a shot, and had the light bulb moment of, I wonder if there's a book in the story of Malört, because I knew people were fascinated by it. And then I sort of ticked through very quickly in my head what we knew, which was not a lot, which is that it was owned by this guy for 60 years. He died and left the brand to his secretary. Somehow Malört got really popular again, and people are absolutely fascinated by it. There's a lot of gaps to fill in there.
There is.
And so I thought, well, let me start poking around. And sure enough, I wasn't sure there would be a book length answer, but as I dug deeper and deeper, it turned out there was.
We're primarily talking about George Brode. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Brody, yeah.
Brody, and then Pat Gabelick, the secretary. Gabelick, thank you, sorry, the secretary. Who are these two people, and how did the story start primarily with George and then go to Pat?
So the product is Jeppson's Malört. Carl Jeppson was a real person, Swedish immigrant. So Malört is a Besk, B-E-S-K, which is a bitter spirit found in southern Sweden. Carl Jeppson was an immigrant from southern Sweden. He came to Chicago in the later 1800s. And as a side hustle, he thought he would make some Besk, just like they had in the old country.
Right.
And he went door to door selling it to fellow Swedes.
And Swedes drank this.
And Swedes drank it.
Do Swedes still drink it?
They do.
Okay, got it.
Yep. And so Carl Jeppson, it was a side hustle in about his 60s or so. He'd worked as a cigar maker and at the railroads, and he just started going door to door selling his homemade Besk. And, he had this built-in audience of these fellow Swedes who'd say, oh, Besk, I haven't seen that since the old country. So, and he sold it. And then there's this other guy, George Brody, Chicago, well, actually he was born in Duluth. His parents were immigrants that went to Canada, to Duluth, to Chicago, complete immigrant story, complete Chicago story, settled in Humboldt Park. They were very poor. They didn't have anything. George came from nothing. But he was a smart guy. He worked hard, found his way into Northwestern Law School, and there met his future wife, excuse me, whose family owned a liquor company. Mm-hmm. He went to law school and was going to be a lawyer, but he graduated just as Prohibition ended. And he thought, why would I be a lawyer when the country's about to get real thirsty? So he went to work for his wife's liquor company. To his wife's chagrin, by the way, she said, I thought I was marrying a lawyer. Yeah, what the heck? But he was very successful with it. And so this company had a portfolio of spirits targeted to immigrant populations. And so this guy, Carl Jeppson, shows up in his office one day and says, I've got this Swedish liquor. Do you want to buy it?
And Carl's in his 70s, I think.
Carl was in his 70s at
Yeah,
that point,
yeah.
And George was a young guy in his 20s, just starting out in the liquor business. And George says, sure. So George buys Jeppson's Malört.
Okay.
And that begins...
For how much do we know?
We don't know.
Don't know. Okay.
And that began George's 65-year run with Malört. So George wound up selling his liquor business and going to practice law in the early 50s. But he kept one brand and one brand only. And of course, that brand was Jeppson's Malört.
Do we know why he decided to keep that one out of the dozens apparently he could have held on to?
I asked Pat that many times because it's sort of the crux of the whole story.
Why
right?
this thing of all things?
Because if he didn't, it would not exist today.
Right.
There's no two ways about it. But he made that decision. So I talked to Pat, who was his companion of 33 years, and his son David. Those were the two people I was able to talk to who knew George well, and I asked them both that question: Why? Why did he keep Malört? So strange. And by the way, George hated Malört. He didn't find it enjoyable. He was on Team Alex.
Thank you. I know he sipped it and tried it many, many times for lots of purposes, but he never found it enjoyable.
And he would always spit it out.
Yeah.
He didn't want to drink it. But what he would say to them, as they relayed to me, is that George was just sort of an interesting guy, and he was interested in the world, and Malört was a challenge for him.
Yeah.
He could have kept something more conventional and easier to drink,
and sell.
Exactly. But where would the fun have been in that, is what he would say to them. So Malört it was a hobby, and it was his life's work.
Right. You describe it as the law work paid the bills, but this was just the passion.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a passion.
Yeah. And it rarely returned rewards for him. He lost money on Malört most years.
How would you describe George's run with Malört?
So George found what George found fascinating about it was the challenge of selling it, right? Because it's this pretty difficult thing to drink by our standards, and he relished the challenge of making it make sense to people and trying to sell it to people. So his earliest efforts was he tried to position it as this sort of high-end product that he compared it to green olives or like oysters, something that
I don't get into that.
You need to sit and savor it. Well, just that it's a polarizing flavor, and
it's a niche.
Once you spend time with it, you will come to understand its refined genius. Like this. It didn't work. Of course, and it's sort of like, of course, it didn't work, right? So then he sort of went the other way, and in a way that'll be familiar to modern Malört drinkers, which is he went all in on sort of this chest-thumping masculinity and daring his audience to drink it. Are you man enough to drink Malört? Are you tough enough? And like, no woman would ever buy, like, just things that you wouldn't really see.
And that was in the ad. That's literally in the ad. No woman would drink this.
No woman would drink this. This is a man's prerogative. Yeah. And so he was really trying to appeal to a real blue collar worker, the factory guys of the 50s and 60s and even into the early 70s in Chicago. Because, we're back then, we were a very blue collar town, 2 bars in every block kind of thing. And that approach actually worked. And he would take out ads in the newspapers and in the like the Blackhawks the program.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he just sort of he was the first person to turn Malört into the punchline that it later became. But his success was on a very small level.
Yeah.
And by the early 70s, he was selling about under 4,000 cases, but that was enough to sort of justify its own existence, barely, maybe. But he found a little bit of success doing that kind of poking fun at the product and thumping the chest and trying to appeal to the real ape,
You write, a broader cultural shift also unfolded as Chicago transformed from the blue-collar bulwark to the white-collar economic engine. The stockyards closed in 1971. The South Side steel plants soon followed. Between the late 70s and late 80s, tens of thousands of middle-class union jobs disappeared, and with them, countless Jeppson Malört drinkers.
Exactly. So that was the audience he had successfully recruited, and that audience started to disappear.
So when was the bottom point in terms of sales, in terms of notoriety? What was the bottom?
It was a long path to the bottom.
Okay.
So from the mid 70s to the early 2000s, sales just kept falling.
Yeah.
Almost literally by the year. Just fewer and fewer people were drinking it. And it became more and more of this sort of strange niche that
even more niche-y, right? By the fact that
there was no ironic appreciation. Right. There was no appreciation. It was just a few old timers scattered around town. There were literally stores and bars that would stock it for a single customer.
Wow.
I talked to one bar owner who had it in the 80s, and he said there was one guy, his name was Carl, actually, and Carl was one of the old-time blue-collar workers who drank it back then, and he had stomach problems, and Malört was the only thing he said he could handle, and he'd come into the bar, he'd sit at the bar, Jeopardy better be on the TV at 3:30, and he would just drink a half a bottle of Malört while watching Jeopardy, and then he'd come back and do the same thing.
So a half bottle of Malört.
Oh, he would drink, he'd drink Malört and water. Malört and water, because it was the only thing his stomach could handle. But it was really like these crusty old Chicago characters.
It's the stereotype, honestly.
All of whom are now gone. But back in the 80s, and 90s were kind of hanging on. And there were literally stores would stock it for one person.
You would be that person today. No, I'm just kidding. So George dies. Then what happens?
1999. And he's amassed a nice little nest egg.
Okay.
He's got about $4 million in the bank. Good for George.
Yeah.
And his family, his sons and his kids and the in-laws, they're all battling over his money. The one thing that no one cares about is Jeppson's Malört.
Right. So they're going after the money that the estate, and they're fighting over it really litigiously. Is that correct?
Yeah. Got a little nasty.
Yeah.
But yeah, no one cared.
And everybody forgot
a whit about Jeppson's Malört because it was truly a worthless brand at that point.
Yeah.
But so he left it to Pat, who was hired as a secretary in 1966 and 1967. Their relationship evolves, let's say.
Yeah.
And he loved Malört. It was truly his life's work.
They never got married.
But
yeah.
But she loved George. So when he died, she just kept Malört going. Pat was running it as a one-person company out of the spare bedroom of her apartment. She had no sales staff, no marketing staff. She didn't go out to the bars or anything. She just was operating it out of her apartment. So all she saw were the sales numbers. And she sees a brand that is not selling and is not making her any money. And what's the point? But an interesting thing happens, which is in 99, 2000, 2001, around there, Malört is selling 1,000 cases. It's 1,000 cases of a dying brand, basically.
Right.
Those old timers we talked about, they were dying. They were moving to Arizona, whatever they were doing.
Because you could only get it here.
Only get it in Chicago.
Right.
By 05, 06, it's still selling 1,000 cases, but the audience has completely turned over, and it's 1,000 cases of discovery. It's 1,000 cases of young people who worked in the bars and restaurants, and musicians and artists discovering it for the first time and getting excited about it. And so Pat had no idea, but Malört, I would call it a second life, but really in a lot of ways it was a first life.
Yeah.
Malört was being discovered by a new generation of eaters and drinkers, and it just turned out to dovetail with what those people wanted, and on several fronts.
And that was there was no marketing, there was no change in marketing, it was completely word of mouth.
There was not only no marketing, there was literally no staff. It was Pat literally operating it out of her apartment. She had no idea. And I think that's part of what allowed Malört to become successful, is that there was no marketing. There was no pandering. There was no trying to get someone to drink it. It was just this kind of weird, polarizing, authentic thing hiding in plain sight with all these years of history behind it.
The worst, best kept secret ever.
Yeah. And that resonated with this new generation of drinker, like the same people who were early to embrace craft beer and those big flavors. Think about the 80s and 90s. It was all about Bud Light and Miller Lite and, light beer and vodka, like real, like lighter flavors. By 05, 06, 07, like into the, 2010, 2012, and people are looking for sort of bigger flavors, more interesting flavors, more dynamic flavors, and stories behind it. And so Malört had a great story. It was Chicago.
Yes.
It had been around forever. It was just this weird, quirky thing. And this new generation of drinker just latched onto it. And so when people this new generation starts discovering it in 05, 06, 07, around there, they taste this stuff for the first time. They say, what the hell is this? They look at it. I mean, that label is, no work of art.
No.
But, people would look at the bottle and what is this? And you'd look for clues on what the hell you were tasting. And then on the back, you'd see made in Florida. And people would say, wait, this stuff tastes like this, and it's available only in Chicago, but it's made in Florida? What is going on here? And it really captured the imagination. So that Florida thing is like one small wrinkle, but I talked to multiple people who said that only heightened the fascination with like, what is this? Why does this exist?
Or more colorfully, as one of your chapters is titled, "What the was that?"
Yeah. What the was that? And that is my kid's single favorite chapter title in the book. They love pointing that one out to Dad.
Yeah. By the way, since we're on the topic, what literally is this? Like, break down how do you make Malört and what is in this bottle?
So it's a very simple product, actually. It's neutral spirit, so vodka, basically, aged with wormwood, which is a bitter, wild-growing herb, which is native to sort of northern-ish Europe.
Okay.
And then it gets a little bit of sugar to balance out that bitterness, and that's it. So, and wormwood is very bitter.
Got that.
Yeah.
I tasted that.
Yes, you did. You're not tasting it anymore. See, now you're good, right?
Yeah, no, it's in there somewhere.
Okay. So
yeah, I'm still getting a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. It's really a very simple product.
Okay. Wormwood, essentially vodka,
neutral spirit, and then a little bit of sugar. Yeah.
The Chicago Handshake, I feel like, is a relatively new phenomenon. This is one half of is that correct?
Yeah.
One half of the Chicago Handshake?
Just a can of Old Style and a shot of Malört.
And has that done, because I feel like I'm hearing that term more now than I have maybe before, and I'm from Chicago, and I feel like only in the last 3, 4, 5 years have I heard that.
Yeah, and it has even migrated. I was at a bar in Denver a few months ago. They have the Chicago Handshake on the menu.
Okay. What is the future, do you believe, of Malört? Where is it going?
So it Malört, was selling very little, and it takes off, and sales are exploding. And now in 2018, Pat sold the brand to CH Distillery for an amount that we will not discuss here, but is revealed in the book for the first time. It's been shared publicly. And CH is a distillery in Chicago, brought production back to Chicago from Florida, and sort of tightened the controls. And so it's a more consistent product now than it used to be. And maybe even a little better, even though you seem skeptical of that.
It's little degrees.
Yeah. And so now Malört is just in the last 15 years. So it was sold in Chicago only and sold about 1,000 cases a year. And now it is sold in more than 30 states and sells about 35,000 cases a year.
Wow.
Yeah. So
explosive growth.
Yeah. So CH bought Malört to really grow it while also trying to maintain, what it is. Like, it didn't want to lose its soul.
Well, that's what I was going to say. This label has never changed. The product has never changed. So many times in the world of basically anything you're trying to get people to buy, let's change it. Let's alter this. Let's switch this up. And it never has.
Yeah.
That is one of the most amazing things to me.
The product has changed a little bit. I do think it's a little easier to drink now.
But it has to be slight.
Oh, no. The original Malört was even worse, yes. And that's the stuff that people really fell in love with and hated. But the guy who owns CH, guy named Tremaine Atkinson, said that, I sort of pushed him on this. I said, Malört has changed, hasn't it? And he acknowledged that what he wanted to do is, as he described it, build out the front end of the sip a little more. So that basically means just a little more sugar so that it doesn't taste terrible immediately.
I will agree the back half is worse than the front.
And then the back half still clobbers you. But it used to be really thin and hot and even more astringent. So I think Tremaine's actually done a pretty nice job of making something that really hits that intersection of a good version of bad.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't call it bad,
yeah,
I do enjoy it.
Yeah.
But so I think he did something interesting with it, but it did lose a little bit of its sort of punk rock underdog energy, because it used to just really be pretty bad. And
you would call it even bad if you had that.
Yeah, but in a way that I still like, because again, I like grapefruit and I like bitter. And as far as, I think the label's a good observation.
Yeah,
because I don't think that label's particularly attractive, but that's George Brody's label right there.
Wow.
And that is part of the charm and the authenticity and the history of Jeppson's Malört. And
it's royal.
Changing that would be a terrible idea. Yeah, that's the history right there.
Well, we've taken a shot. We've told the story. You wrote the book. What is your one takeaway from writing this book and learning this story so deeply?
It's all about people and relationships. I think that's what makes the world spin round. And it's Malört is the axis around which the book spins, of course, but it's really about the people and the relationships. And that's what good narrative needs.
It was a great story, an already good story, very well told. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
And come back again. We could talk about the book you wrote about beer in Chicago. That would be so fun. And thank you for indulging me in the shot, or rather, did I indulge you, I guess, in the shot because you like it?
No, I thought I had to apologize to you for taking the shot.
No apology needed. Josh Noel, thanks for coming by.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
I enjoyed almost all of that. You could probably guess which part was not super fun for me. Had Malört before, but never done it before a podcast. What my main takeaway from this conversation is the drink and the story are actually a really good match. Everybody's got feelings about Malört that they are so eager to share, especially in those painful moments right after you take the shot. But hearing the backstory from Josh, who spent months and months working on this story, talking to Pat, and all the twists and turns, it is a good match for how people try to describe this drink. Like we said in the podcast, everybody's a creative writer as soon as they have Malört. It just inspires such creativity and strong feeling. And the story itself about how this thing continues to exist is, I think, equally emotional and equally captivating. It was such a cool story to hear about how this thing that really on paper should not exist. There are so many times when this drink should have gone away. And I'm sure people after they have it probably want it to go away. And Josh could find no comparable product or service where people hate it so much that it just continues on and just continues to be embraced. I couldn't think of another one either. So what a great episode, a uniquely Chicago episode, and a wonderful way to start. And hopefully you enjoyed learning a little bit more about this thing that we all love to hate. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed that conversation, here are some other episodes of The Takeaway. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to listen on the go, check us out on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.